The wind off the Blue Ridge Mountains swept through the porch screens of the old Finnegan house, where Meredith Quinn stood cradling a cup of lukewarm coffee. Below her, the vineyard sprawled in disciplined rows, brittle under the late October sun. It had been 6 months since her father passed, and she still hadn't opened the safe he left behind. Not out of neglect, out of dread. The last time she saw her brother, Grant, was at the funeral. He hadn't stayed for the wake. He hadn't asked about the land, the winery, or her. That was Grant in a nutshell, a man who left, and then asked for the inheritance in absentia. So when the Range Rover pulled into the driveway at 10:13 a.m., her stomach turned before she even saw the license plate. Grant stepped out dressed in L.A. casual shirt, $1,000 boots, and a smirk that hadn't aged. "Murr," he said, arms out. "You look grounded." She didn't answer. He looked past her toward the vineyard. "Looks smaller than I remember." "It's bigger than you ever cared to know," she replied. He didn't flinch. "We should talk." She led him inside the house that still smelled faintly of her father's cigars and oak polish. They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where they once argued over who got the last peach tart. He placed a manila envelope between them. "I found a buyer," he said simply. "Out of Charlottesville. Vintner Group with international backing." Meredith didn't move. "You assume I want to sell. Dad's will splits everything," Grant said. 50-50. "I'm not looking for a fight. Just a clean break. A payday." She narrowed her eyes. "You don't even know what he left." Grant smiled, that same infuriating charm. "I know enough." She stood. "Come with me." They walked to the study. She pulled aside the rug, opened the floor safe. Inside were ledgers, property deed sand, a handwritten note. Grant reached for it, but Meredith grabbed it first. "If you're reading this, then you're both still alive, which means there's still hope you won't ruin each other. Beneath the house, where the wine never touched, is what I never told anyone about. Not even Meredith. If you dig for gold, remember it can corrupt. If you choose instead to grow, there's more than enough here for both of you." Her hands trembled. Grant looked stunned. "He hid something," Meredith whispered. Grant's eyes burned with sudden energy. "Then we find it." Meredith looked up sharply. She wasn't sure which would be harder, protecting her land or her father's final secret from the man she no longer trusted. The cellar beneath the Finnegan house was more than just storage. It was myth-brick-walled, cool even in summer, and sprawling in ways that didn't match the floor plan above. Their great-grandfather had designed it, built by moonlight and mason hands with secrets long buried. Meredith stood at the top of the narrow staircase, flashlight in hand. Grant followed behind, tapping his phone screen to use its dim torch. His $1,000 boots weren't made for dust or decades-old spiders. "Why did he say where the wine never touched?" Grant asked. Meredith flicked the flashlight left and right. "We never used the north wall. Too damp for storage. Dad always said the foundations shifted, but he never had it sealed." They reached the bottom, the air thick with mildew and old cork. Shelves stretched floor to ceiling, cradling dusty bottles labeled in inked cursive. She ignored them and walked directly to the northern wall. "What exactly are we looking for?" Grant asked. "A lie, or a legacy." She ran her fingers along the uneven bricks. One near the floor jutted slightly. She knelt, pressing in. "Nothing. Help me," she said. Together, they began removing bottles, clearing space. Behind the final rack, near the floor, a seam ran vertically. Faint, nearly invisible. Grant inhaled. "There's a door here." "No, Hingis." He stepped back, examining. Then, without a word, he reached into his pocket, pulled out his car key and pressed the fob. From the fob's chain dangled an old brass key. Meredith stared. "Where did you get that?" "Dad mailed it to me, month before he died. No note." She opened her mouth, then closed it. Grant inserted the key into a tiny hole near the seam. A click, then a soft groan as the stone wall shifted inward. Behind it, darkness. Meredith stepped inside first. The hidden chamber was no larger than a walk-in closet. Wooden crates lined the walls, stacked neatly. A faded metal filing cabinet stood in one corner, its drawers shut tight. Dust swirled in the air. Meredith cracked open the nearest crate. Inside bundles of old currency, banknotes from the 1960s, tied in twine. Grant opened another. Gold coins. Holy. Stop, Meredith said. Don't touch more than we have to. He laughed, a short, sharp bark. Are you serious? Do you even realize what's in here? I realize Dad said it could corrupt. Grant held up a coin, examining it under the light. This isn't corruption. It's redemption. Do you have any idea what this is worth? She ignored him and opened the filing cabinet. Inside were deeds, sealed envelopes, and one leather-bound journal. Her name was written on the first page. She opened it slowly. Mur, I never told you everything. The vineyard saved my soul. But the gold bought the land. I wanted to leave it behind, to show you that roots matter more than riches. I kept it hidden because I feared what it might do to you two. If you're reading this, you've found it. And you've done it together. That's the only way I'll allow it to be used. There's a clause in the trust. Look in the envelope marked final terms. She flipped through until she found the envelope, tore it open. Inside, a notarized document. The clause was clear. Access to the gold was contingent upon a shared, notarized agreement between both heirs to preserve the Finnegan Vineyard as a living entity for no less than 20 years. Violate that, and the entire cash would be legally claimed by a conservation trust their father had founded anonymously. Grant read over her shoulder. He didn't speak for a full minute. Then, he played us. Even from the grave. No, she said. He protected us. They emerged from the cellar in silence. The sun had dipped behind the ridge, casting long shadows across the vineyard. Meredith sat on the porch while Grant paced. I came here to sell, he finally said. To escape another divorce, another round of debt collectors. And instead, I find out Dad was richer than any of us knew. And he made that fortune untouchable unless we grow grapes? She didn't look at him. He was a winemaker, Grant. He knew what mattered. You always sided with him. I stayed. That's not the same thing. He paused. So what now? She exhaled. Now we make a choice. Together. They stared at the horizon. That night, Meredith pulled out her father's old maps. Together, they traced the boundaries of the land, outlined renovations needed for bottling, repairs to the main fermentation tank. By 2 a.m., Grant was sketching out business ideas. He knew people, investors, distributors. All it needed was credibility and soil. You'd actually stay here? Meredith asked. He hesitated. For a season, maybe longer. She didn't press. That was more than she'd expected. The next morning, they met with the estate lawyer, signed a mutual agreement. Notarized. Filed. The trust was now active. They used a sliver of the gold to hire vineyard workers, restore machinery, and launch a marketing campaign. Finnegan Vineyard's a legacy reclaimed. The rest remained locked away. Not out of fear, out of faith. Faith that, just maybe, what they were building could grow beyond blood and bitterness. Spring came late to the vineyard. The frost held longer than usual, stubborn as the past. But when the first shoots broke through the winter-weary vines, Meredith took it as a sign. Maybe healing would come just as slowly, and just as surely. Grant had been living in the guest house for almost 3 weeks now. His suits were replaced with denim and work boots, though he still answered his phone with that big city clipped tone. The vineyard crew respected him for his fast learning and easy charm. But Meredith could tell he wasn't yet rooted. Every day they worked side by side. He asked about irrigation flow, about pruning intervals, about when to bottle versus when to barrel. She answered with the quiet confidence of someone who had lived this land, not just owned it. One afternoon, while clearing a neglected row near the creek bed, Meredith caught Grant standing still, staring down at something between the vines. She approached. Buried among the weeds was a wooden marker. Weathered, chipped. "Did Dad ever mention this part of the vineyard?" he asked. Meredith squatted beside it, brushing away the dirt. There were initials carved into the plank. LQ. 1932. She nodded slowly. "That was our great-grandmother. Lillian Quinn. Dad told me she planted this row during the Depression. Said it was her prayer in grape form." Grant was quiet for a moment. Then, "We should restore it." Meredith smiled. "You're starting to sound like a Quinn." Later that week, their first big order came through. A restaurant in Asheville wanted 24 cases of their bottled 2016 reserve. It was more symbolic than profitable, but it lifted their spirits. Grant celebrated by bringing home a bottle of wine older than either of them and making pasta from scratch. Over dinner, he said, "I used to think land just meant liability. Property taxes, leaky roofs, fences to mend. But now, I see it." She raised her glass. "To roots, then." They clinked glasses, but the moment was broken by the sound of tires on gravel. Meredith stepped outside. A black SUV pulled up, sleek and unfamiliar. Out stepped a tall woman in a navy suit, clipboard in hand. "Miss Quinn?" she asked. "I'm Monica Lawton, representing Sienna Ridge Holdings." Meredith stiffened. Grant joined her. Monica continued, "We've come across documentation indicating a lien placed on part of this property before your father passed. I'd like to discuss your repayment plan." Meredith felt her heart drop. "What lien?" Monica pulled out a folder. "From 2008. A loan against 12 acres northeast parcel, collateralized with a high-interest vineyard improvement bond. The total owed with interest is now $183,000. Grant took the folder, flipping through it. "This can't be right." "I'm afraid it is. And if payment isn't arranged within 30 days, Sienna Ridge will exercise its right to foreclose on the parcel." Meredith stared out toward the northeast hill. "The best producing section. The very heart of the vineyard." "We'll be in touch," Monica said politely, then left. That night, the porch light remained off. Meredith sat alone, staring at her father's journal. There was no mention of the lien. No warning. Grant sat beside her. "Why wouldn't he tell us? Maybe he thought he'd pay it off. Or maybe he wanted us to discover it. To make the vineyard ours through challenge, not just inheritance." He frowned. "That's a messed up kind of lesson." Meredith didn't argue. The next day, they visited the county office. The lien was real. And worse, it had a balloon clause. "We can't pay this out of the trust," Grant said as they drove back. "It would violate the preservation terms." Meredith was silent. That night, she called Sylvia. The banker who had been a friend of their father's. "There's one option," Sylvia said. "There's a preservation grant through the Department of Agriculture. If you can prove historical significance, it could cover the cost." "What do we need?" Meredith asked. "Documentation. Photos, letters. Something that proves that parcel has value beyond grapes." For days, Meredith and Grant scoured the attic. They found boxes of receipts, blueprints, letters, but nothing specific to the northeast plot, until Meredith opened a box labeled LQ. Inside were handwritten letters, hundreds of them. Lillian's diary entries, poems, prayers. And then one, dated July 1932. "Today I planted the slope where the morning sun hits first. I pray these vines will grow strong. May they feed my children's children." Enclosed was a black and white photo of Lillian, shovel in hand, smiling fiercely. Meredith held it up like a relic. "Will this do?" she asked. Grant looked at it and nodded. "Let's save the hill." The morning sun stretched long fingers across the vineyard as Meredith and Grant drove toward the regional office of the Department of Agriculture. In Meredith's lap rested a leather folder filled with documents, letters, and the photograph of Lillian Quinn holding her shovel. It felt heavier than its weight suggested. The preservation grant officer, a man named Curtis Holloway, met them with the formality of a tax auditor and the slow smile of someone who genuinely liked vines. He wore a bolo tie shaped like a grape cluster and had a tremor in his left hand that he didn't try to hide. "We don't get many heritage applicants anymore," he said as he flipped through the contents of the folder. "Most people want to bulldoze and build condos. We want to rebuild what's already here," Meredith said. Curtis raised an eyebrow at the photograph. "That's your great-grandmother?" "She planted the slope," Grant added. "During the Depression, we want to honor that." Curtis was quiet for a moment. "I'll be honest. The budget's tight. But we just lost 3 projects to developers this quarter. There's discretionary space." Meredith held her breath. "I'll come inspect the land this week. If it holds up, you'll get approval before the deadline." The next few days were a storm of preparation. Meredith and Grant recruited volunteers from the local farming co-op to clear debris from the hill. Sylvia stopped by with paperwork in triplicate and fresh coffee. Rebuilding wasn't just about proving history. It was about activating community. Curtis arrived on Friday morning, clipboard in hand and his bolo tie glinting. He walked the northeast parcel in silence, occasionally muttering notes to himself. When he paused near the old wooden marker bearing LQ 1932, Meredith felt her stomach twist. He knelt, brushed dirt from the base. "You didn't plant over this," he said. "It's sacred to us," Meredith replied. He stood slowly. "That's rare." The approval came via email the following Monday. Subject line: Preservation Grant. Approved. Meredith read it 3 times before exhaling. They had done it. The lien would be covered. The land was safe. That night, Grant grilled steaks behind the main house, the scent of rosemary and smoke drifting through the windows. Meredith poured a bottle of their newly labeled Quinn Heritage Red, saved for the occasion. "To Lillian," she said. "To not selling out," Grant added, raising his glass. They drank under the porch lights, which flickered like stars. But the peace was brief. 2 days later, Meredith received a letter in a manila envelope. No return address. Inside, a photocopy of an anonymous offer made to Sienna Ridge Holdings. A cash buyout for the entire Vineyard 7 figures. Attached was a post-it, scrawled in a familiar hand. "They'll come for the rest next. Be ready, Dad." Meredith stared at the note. The handwriting matched his journal. But he'd been gone nearly a year. She showed it to Grant, whose face darkened. "You think this is real?" "I don't know, but someone's watching, and they know our land just went up in value." Grant rubbed his temples. "Maybe we should consider a private fence." Motion sensors. Meredith's eyes were fixed on the ridge. "Number, we don't retreat. We make the land louder, more public. More protected." Grant blinked. "You want to open it up?" She nodded. "Farm tours. Tastings. History walks. If this place becomes part of the town's story, no corporation will dare touch it." For the first time, Meredith saw her father's lesson clearly. The gold he'd hidden, the vineyard he preserved, it wasn't just for family. It was for legacy. And legacy didn't hide. It bloomed. By the first weekend of May, the vineyard had transformed. Gone was the quiet isolation Meredith had once cherished. Now, laughter echoed through the rows as guests wandered between trellised grapes, sipping the first tasting batches of Quinn Heritage Rosé. Children played near the shaded oak by the barn. Locals who hadn't set foot on the property in years now came bearing baked goods, stories, and curiosity. The farm tours had begun as an idea. Within days, they had grown into a full-fledged festival. Local musicians set up in the old storage shed, now converted into a stage. A neighboring farmer lent hay bales for seating. Volunteers helped design signs, telling the story of Lillian Quinn, the Depression-era matriarch who planted the slope by hand. At the center of it all, Meredith and Grant worked shoulder to shoulder. Grant gave charismatic vineyard tours, sprinkling in humor and hard-earned knowledge. Meredith managed the tastings, speaking with reverence about the vines, the soil, and the legacy they were trying to protect. By mid-afternoon, Meredith was restocking wine glasses in the barn when she heard her name. "Miss Quinn?" She turned. A young woman in a crisp blazer stepped forward, flanked by two men with earpieces. "I'm Amanda LeClaire." With Cena Ridge Holdings. Meredith's spine stiffened. "You're late to the party." Amanda smiled thinly. "Actually, I'd say right on time. May I speak with you?" She led Meredith to the far edge of the barn, away from the music. "I know about the lien payoff," Amanda said. "Clever move. The preservation grant bought you time, but this land's valuation just tripled. Because we restored it." "Exactly. Which means it's now more desirable for everyone." She handed Meredith a folder. Inside. A new offer. 8 figures. Full acquisition. Complete rights. Immediate wire transfer. Meredith didn't blink. "Not interested." Amanda tilted her head. "I think your brother might feel differently." "He won't. I wouldn't be so sure." That night, Meredith didn't mention the offer. She simply sat beside Grant on the porch, watching as the string lights glowed across the vineyard. "Did you ever imagine this?" he asked. "No," she said. "But it feels right." He nodded. "I talked to someone today. A distributor from Napa. They're interested in a regional partnership." "That's great." He hesitated. "But they want expansion. Acreage. Outside investment." She turned to face him. "And?" I told them no. A beat. Then. "Because this place isn't a business. It's an inheritance." Meredith smiled. But before she could reply, her phone buzzed. An anonymous message. "Your brother was lying. Check his email." Her chest tightened. She looked at Grant. He was watching the stars. "Everything okay?" he asked. She forced a smile. "Yeah. Just a reminder. I forgot to turn off the irrigation." She stood and walked inside, her fingers trembling. She opened Grant's old laptop in the study. They often used it for Vineyard spreadsheets. The email app was still signed in. She typed Sienna into the search bar. Messages appeared. Dozens. The latest dated just 2 days ago. From Amanda LeClaire subject. Revised terms grant we can go above 10 million if your sister agrees to a minority vote. If not, we can proceed with your share and initiate a legal partition. Let me know. Meredith's breath caught. He hadn't said a word. Not when the land was threatened. Not even now. She heard the porch door open. Footsteps. "Mer?" Grant called. She closed the laptop gently. "In here," she said. He stepped into the doorway, silhouetted by the porch light. "I was thinking we should do a full bottling run next week. Push out the Heritage Red statewide." Meredith nodded slowly. "Sounds good." But in her mind, the vines had already started to wither. Meredith didn't sleep that night. The air in the house felt heavier, tainted. At 3 a.m., she walked the rows alone. Flashlight beam dancing across the leaves. The vines whispered their secrets in the breeze, but the one she most needed to hear remained silent. She didn't confront Grant. Not yet. Something in her still hoped she was wrong, that there was an explanation beyond greed or fear. But as dawn crept across the vineyard, casting gold through the mist, she knew the truth. This land was still under siege, this time from within. The next morning she drove into town. She sat with Sylvia at the bank, sliding over the email printout. Sylvia read it, face pale. A partition would split the property. He could sell his half. Meredith nodded. "You have options. If you can prove bad faith or a breach of fiduciary responsibility." "I don't want to sue my brother," she said quietly. "Not yet." Back home, she waited. Grant returned around noon, car dusty from the back roads. "We need to talk," she said before he could even close the door. He followed her inside. She placed the email in front of him. His face didn't change. "You went through my email?" "I needed to know." He sat down. "You don't understand. Amanda approached me before the grant. I said no. But when the numbers climbed, I got curious. That's all it was. Curiosity. She said you could sell your half. I haven't signed anything. But you were considering it." He stood. "It's not that simple. You think I don't care? I care more than you know. But we're bleeding money, Mur. We're hanging by grants and borrowed goodwill. One dry season and this dream crumbles." She stepped closer. "Then we fight harder. Not sell out." He laughed bitterly. "Not everyone can afford your principles." Meredith's voice dropped. "Dad trusted us both. But the trust only activates if we work together. You sell, and it dissolves. The gold is gone. The land goes to the conservancy." "I know," he said quietly. "Then why risk it?" He didn't answer. That evening, a storm rolled in. Thunder cracked across the hills, lightning silhouetting the vineyard in stark flashes. Meredith stood by the window, watching the vines sway. She heard movement behind her. Grant entered the room slowly, hands in his pockets. "I'm staying," he said. She turned. "I withdrew from the deal. Sent Amanda a formal statement." Meredith didn't speak. "I was scared," he continued, "of failing again, of investing everything into something that might fall apart. But I remembered Dad, the way he used to walk this land at dusk. He believed in it. In us." She exhaled, shoulders easing. "And I believe in it too," he finished. Weeks passed. The vineyard launched its first official harvest festival. Visitors came from neighboring states. Wine critics toured the cellar. Articles were written about the rebirth of Quinn Vineyard. They used a portion of the hidden gold to establish an education program for young vintners, in Lillian Quinn's name. The rest remained untouched. Still locked. Still silent. One morning, Meredith stood at the crest of the northeast slope, watching the workers below. Grant approached. "We did it." "No," she corrected. "We're doing it." He laughed. "Fair." They stood together, the wind tugging at their shirts, the soil beneath them rich with memory. The vineyard would never be easy. Storms would return. Temptation might come again. But now it was rooted in love, in legacy, in truth. And some roots, once deep enough, could never be bought.